My name is Vanessa Chauhan. I am with Polaris Project and specifically with the National Hotline. Today, for the next hour and 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you a lot about the work that Polaris does, and more specifically what the hotline does, how, what services we provide, and then how we're able to help you as individuals, you as communities, you as professionals, sort of learn more about trafficking and sort of really be leaders in your city, state, communities. We've developed a lot of tools throughout the years to help professionals, to help students, to just increase awareness, both about the issue of human trafficking as well as the hotline itself. I know this wasn't talked about much yesterday, but you all have had a lot of information thrown at you all at once. It's a lot of difficult information to take in. So if at any point in time you need a break, you need a breather, my slides are there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information. There isn't a lot of graphic or violent information, but I will try and add some hotline stories just to give you a perspective of the kinds of calls that we're receiving through the hotline. But it's not going to bother me one bit if you need to take a moment. Part of doing this work is also taking care of yourself, and so learning what your limitations are, learning what your triggers are, and if at any point in time you need to get up and take a breath and get out of the room, please do so. I also don't want to spend the rest of the hour talking at you, so please make this as interactive as possible. Ask lots of questions. I do have a presentation prepared, but feel free to interrupt me with questions. Please share your stories. Please share your experiences. Hopefully this is a forum where people can not only learn from Brittany and I, but sort of learn from one another. So please feel free to share, and please contribute. How does this work? Okay. As I mentioned, we're going to talk a lot about Polaris and the work that we do, and I'm going to talk about it generally, and I'm going to really focus on my home, which is the hotline, and it's been my home for the past 4 years. Hopefully you'll get a better idea of what we do, what services we provide, and what resources can really help you as you become or begin to become leaders in your communities. And then how we can help. So Polaris Project was started in 2002 by a couple of seniors at Brown University, Catherine Chauhan and Derek Ellerman. They came across a newspaper article that referenced a raid at a brothel, and the brothel turned out to be a commercial brothel. It was a massage parlor. And the investigation resulted in about 6 women being pulled out. And these women were all of Asian descent. They all had cigarette burns all over their body. The lead investigator of that particular situation described the situation that they were in as slavery. And so this really brought it home for these 2 seniors in college that this is actually happening here in the United States. It's not something that's far away in Southeast Asia or something that involves international individuals. It's something that's happening right here in our own backyards and very close to where their apartments were. So they focused on wanting to try and eradicate slavery. So Polaris Project was birthed on Valentine's Day 2002. Valentine's Day, not to celebrate Valentine's Day as it is right now a commercial holiday, but for the more significant reason why we celebrate February 14th is to raise awareness about violence against women and children. So we started in 2002, so we've been operating for over 10 years. Our primary focus is still eradication. So we're now looking at what have we done in the past 10 years and what can we do going forward to make a dent in trafficking. How are we, as an organization, as a community, dismantling some of these trafficking networks? How are we working towards eradication? The one thing about Polaris Project is it's one of very few organizations that works on human trafficking comprehensively. So what you have in the movement right now is a lot of organizations, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of organizations that are finding their niche in the movement and focusing a lot of their efforts either on serving a particular population, serving a single type of trafficking. So you have a lot of shelters that are opening up that specifically work with domestic minor sex trafficking victims. We have other organizations that focus solely on labor trafficking. Polaris Project is one of very few that looks at human trafficking holistically. So we both address sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking, and we work with all demographics: males, females, adults, minors, foreign nationals, US citizens, everyone. Tell you a little bit about some of our programs. We have the policy program, and Brittany talked to you about it a little bit yesterday, where they focus both on influencing state and federal legislation. So through the help of the efforts of our policy department, in February 2013, it's February 2013, Wyoming became the last state in the United States to pass comprehensive anti-trafficking legislation, which is a huge success. We also have the direct client services, and this is our client services department. We have one in DC and we have one in New Jersey that provides comprehensive case management and related services to victims and survivors of trafficking. We don't work with a particular population. We serve all demographics, all populations, both victims and survivors of sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking. We don't provide shelter, but we do provide comprehensive case management, but they do coordinate shelter with local area shelters. We work with certain hotels that provide hotel points, which makes it easy for us to access shelter and then still provide the comprehensive related services. We have a huge public outreach and communications team that focuses a lot on engaging our grassroots network, getting the community educated and more aware about the issue of trafficking, equipping them with resources to go out into their community and help post their hotline number, help raise awareness, help fundraise, just get people, general public, students, individuals sort of more engaged on the issue of human trafficking. We have a really big Facebook presence, a really big Twitter presence, and so it's a great thing to get involved with if it's something that you're interested in, especially if it's if the anti-trafficking area is something that you really want to get involved in. We have the global programs. It's a fairly new program. It started about a year ago, with the idea being that one day we will get to a point where wherever you are in the world, if you call one central number, you can be connected to the best resource in your locality. So right now, we have this Google fund or grant where we're in partnership with an organization in Europe called La Strada to sort of help identify what all the anti-trafficking hotlines are, what all the anti-trafficking organizations are, what other related field service providers there are throughout the world that are working on the issue of trafficking, and vetting them and trying to see if we can build a network. There are also countries that are looking to build an anti-trafficking infrastructure, so they're looking to replicate the national hotline in their own countries. And so eventually we're going to be start doing a lot of training and technical assistance in helping countries build their anti-trafficking infrastructure from the ground up. Before I talk about the national hotline, I have another program that I forgot to list here, which is fairly new. I think it's only been a couple of months since its inception, and it's called DASI, which stands for Data Analysis and Strategic Interventions. So what we've realized is through the hotline, we have over 5 years worth of data, and in keeping in line with our original mission, which was eradication, how are we implementing and manipulating this data, and how are we analyzing this data to strategically find ways to eradicate trafficking? So eventually what we're trying to do is trying to see if there are patterns. Are we getting reports about the same traffickers? Are we getting reports about the same massage parlors? And hopefully provide a packet to either local communities or a region or law enforcement to then help either build a strategic intervention to address that network or dismantle that network, or help communities build a campaign around a particular network. So if you realize that in this part of Montana there's a lot of trafficking regarding the oil industry, how do we, based on this data, now customize a campaign to specifically address, raise awareness, and then hopefully dismantle the trafficking network? So that is sort of the vision behind this new program. And lastly, the national hotline. So the National Human Trafficking Resource Center is another program of Polaris Project. We've had operation of the hotline since December 7th, 2007. It's actually owned by the Department of Health and Human Services, but it's been operated and managed by Polaris Project. So we're not a law enforcement entity, we're not a government entity. The Department of HHS only funds about 40% of the hotline. So we rely a lot on other foundational grants, a lot of private grants, individual donations to finish off the rest. We're basically a toll-free hotline. We are accessible 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, completely confidential, and you will always talk to a live person, unless, of course, a media campaign is blasting our number and then it's utter chaos and we've got 1,000 calls coming into the hotline. So for the most part, if you call into the hotline, expect to speak to a real live person. We respond to a variety of different calls. We're primarily designed to be a resource and referral agency. We're based out of Washington, D.C. We have a call center. And the idea being that no matter where you call in the country, we can get you connected to the best resource, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's a service provider, whether it's shelter, whether it's medical services, we can get you connected to the best resource in your locality. So we take a variety of different calls. We take crisis calls, we take tips about trafficking. People call us for unrelated things too. We get a lot of pranks, we get a lot of calls about traffic violations. So it runs the gamut. So we get tons and tons of calls, but our biggest call volume comes from individuals, community members who either learned about the issue, who've seen human trafficking be mentioned in a newspaper, in a magazine article, and are interested in learning more about what the issue is and how to get involved in their communities and what they can do as individuals. We're not an investigative agency, so a lot of people think that by reporting to us that we will then take the information and start a full-blown investigation. Again, we go back to we're a resource center, so we're sort of the central hub to take all this information, provide a lot of information, so we disseminate a lot of information to law enforcement. And I'll talk about my role a little bit later, but ideally what we do is we identify who all the local stakeholders are in every state, in every region, in every city. We build relationships with them and build protocols so that if we get a call on the hotline for a request for law enforcement, I have a particular police officer that I know is victim-centered that I can connect you to, and similar to a service provider. We're very victim-centered, we're very strength-based. We use an empowerment model. We don't tell you what to do, we give you options. And we have a lot of languages represented on our hotline. So Spanish is another very heavily requested language on our hotlines. We have about half of our staff that speak Spanish. I speak Hindi and Gujarati. We have a couple of other people that speak French, Russian. So we do have a smattering of languages represented within our staff. And in the event that we're getting a language that's not represented by our staff, we connect to a language line called Certified Languages International that connects us to a neutral interpreter in 0 to 30 seconds. So it's been a really great tool. So there are 4 ways to access the hotline, primarily through our toll-free hotline. Everyone, if there's one takeaway, it's to save this hotline number on your phone. Please, please, please pass it along. It's a completely public number. Print out as many flyers as you can. Post them everywhere you can with permission by whoever owns the property. But it's a public number. Put it on your websites, promote it, call it. We also have an email that is checked every day. Some people choose not to speak over the phone, so they decide to email. Or does anyone know the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children? Does anyone know that organization? They have an online reporting mechanism on their website called the Cyber Tip Line Report. We've got something similar set up on our website as well. So individuals that have a tip or want information can log onto our website and fill out an online reporting form. And it could be anonymous, you could provide your information. And lastly, as of February or March last year, we introduced texting. And it's Be Free, the short code is 233-733. And it's been a wonderful tool for us to be able to access youth. It's been a great forum for us. It's just introduced us to this whole new population. We were getting calls from minors, we were getting calls from youth, but there was always that point when you hear about a minor getting exploited, your gut feeling is always to be reactionary and try to get that minor out of the situation or report. With texting, you're giving that minor the space to be able to build a rapport and then tell their story at their pace. You don't get that rushed sense like you would over the phone. So texting has opened up a wonderful avenue for us, which has been really great.
I also think that sometimes these kids are not in a position where they can speak.
Right.
They can text quietly, but if they spoke up.
Absolutely, and that's a great comment, because I was about to tell you a story from a few months ago where we had this young lady, she was an adult lady, that called us, and she had met an acquaintance from a couple of months before. She hadn't really known him that long, but they had met each other in passing, they knew each other's names, and she was headed home, and he offered to give her a ride home. And he gave her a ride home, as well as another female who he called her his girlfriend. And once they were in the car, he then told her, I'm not going to be taking you home. I'm actually going to be forcing you to engage in commercial sex. And so this individual was riding in the car. It was almost cross-country that they were riding, or something. I think it was an 8-hour or 10-hour journey. And she couldn't call us because she was in the car with this alleged pimp. She couldn't email, she didn't have her, her computer or anything, so her only option was texting. And it worked out perfectly, because she would send us text messages to, every mile marker or every exit, so that we were able to coordinate a response. And it was wonderful that we were able to get the state patrol in both states, both with the state that they were leaving as well as the state that they were entering, to be able to circumvent them and then be able to get her. So it was fantastic. Texting has just been this amazing tool for us. So we provide a variety of different services. Tip reporting is one of our biggest services that we provide. We take a lot of tips about potential trafficking situations. These are tips from third parties, from people who either know someone in a situation or has even just is reporting something suspicious. You don't have to be an expert on trafficking to call the hotline. If something looks a little suspicious, if something looks a little weird, it's better to call our hotline than to just sit on it and think, maybe I should have reported it, or report it 8 months later. The sooner you report it, the better. We're a very non-judgmental hotline. So even if you call us and the only thing that you want to report is you saw an older man with a younger looking girl, and you don't know much else, we'll walk you through what you saw. As I mentioned before, we ask a lot of questions. So we'll ask you for a description, we'll ask you for a location where you saw her, we'll ask you about demeanor, we'll ask you about physical marks on either one of the bodies, identifying tattoos or attire or license plates. Because essentially, in order for us to make this call effective, we're trying to get as much information that we can then report to law enforcement. And law enforcement is not going to work with information such as, I just saw an older man with a younger woman yesterday at 2 p.m. They're looking for identifying information, and so we're trying to extract that from you. So feel free to call. Even with basic information, we'll try and tease out the rest. Crisis response, we do provide that assistance. Our crisis call volume is not as high as the rest of our call volume. So when we're talking about crisis response, we're talking about individuals who are either in a potential trafficking situation in the moment and need assistance leaving their situation, or it's someone who's either left just very recently and wants access to emergency shelter, medical services, etc. So it could be a variety of different things. So an example of that, the girl who called us while she was in the car with this potential pimp, that was a crisis situation because we had to mobilize resources pretty quickly. Referrals, this is a pretty big area as well. And these could be from survivors of trafficking who may be out of their situation a long time, but didn't know, or maybe just recently found out or identified as survivors of trafficking. and they want to get connected to more comprehensive services. It could be attorneys or related field providers such as DV organizations or sexual assault organizations that are working with survivors and want to connect them to more comprehensive resources. And then training and technical assistance, which is what we're doing right now. We help local entities, communities sort of develop an infrastructure to train whatever audience they want to, whether it's law enforcement, service providers, students. We provide a lot of training and technical assistance, and it ranges. We have a lot of tools and resources on our website. We have a lot of online trainings on our website that are free and accessible, and you can use them and reuse them. And then we also do a lot of in-person trainings. We have a database. In the past 5-7 years, we've developed a referral database. So there's currently over 3,000 entries in our database that include anything from specific anti-trafficking organizations to related field providers to law enforcement working on the issue to all the task forces, every law enforcement agency, every government agency, the Department of Labor, anything that we can then, and it's a work in progress, so we're always looking to add new organizations. Currently, our referral database has been very confidential. It's been internal only, so the way we've been operating is for people to call our hotline or email us and then tell us what type of resources that they're looking for, and we'll give them the resources. We're now transitioning to making a public-facing version of our database available on our website. So you can go to our website, you can apply a couple of filters. So if you're looking for a transitional shelter for transgendered youth in a particular city and state, hopefully by applying those filters, you'll be able to access our database, our resource database, to see what's available. A lot of people want to know how many shelters across the United States are serving minors, how many shelters across the United States are serving males. And so hopefully this tool will enable people to get that answer immediately. We also have a resource library, and this is comprises both of information and materials that we produce as an organization, but as well as other publications made by individuals, other organizations, other reports. And so ideally we're looking to be the centralized hub, this information resource center where we're collecting anything that's relevant to trafficking and providing a base where people can then access that information. I'll talk to you a little bit more about referral and reporting protocols as I go further in the slides, but the way we've set up the countries, we've divided the country up into 5 different regions, and each, so I have the central part of the country that includes about 12 states, and it's my job to design and maintain protocols for every state or every city in those states that I manage, such that if we get a call on the hotline, whether it's a crisis case, whether it's a tip, whether it's a referral, we know the exact people to refer that person to. So we have a response both on the law enforcement aspect of things as well as the victim service provider aspect of things. And then lastly, we have a case tracking database. Most of it has been very, very internal, so we don't record any of our calls, but we do log every single one of our calls. We have a database that we enter all of our information, and it enables us to create topical reports. So if people want to know how many calls we've received from minors and what those minor calls were all about, you know, how many cases of labor trafficking were referenced, how many cases of sex trafficking were referenced, what were some of the networks that were referenced within that realm. So in sex trafficking, was it mostly domestic minor pimp control, or was it, commercials or ads on Backpage? Sort of really digging deep into our data and looking at our call volume and our data and really analyzing that to help people find a response. So what happens when you call? So I think someone asked this during the screening of Not My Life. You will always speak to a live person. And we primarily, our role is to triage cases. So we'll immediately do a safety assessment. We'll assess whether you're safe, we'll ask where you're calling from, this helps our data, why you're calling and how we can assist. For tips, we're trying very quickly to assess what kind of situation that they're reporting, where the situation is occurring, and sort of asking very targeted questions to get at that detailed information. If it's a victim or survivor, we're very much doing a safety assessment and we're doing a needs assessment. We're assessing for medical emergencies or medical assistance needs. We're assessing for danger. Sometimes a lot of individuals, especially adult victims, will call us in a very, very small window. Her pimp has either left, she has about a 30-minute window, and she's calling from the hotel and she needs emergency assistance right now. In a lot of states, our contacts are not in the city where the individual is. And so we have to rely a lot on the 911 infrastructure because they are designed to be the first responders. So a lot of it involves advocacy, talking to the particular dispatcher and explaining the issue. With adults, the obstacle is always, she's an adult. Why do you want me to help her? She can get out on her own. And so it's a lot of advocacy. It's a lot of trying to convince them to really help this individual and sort of talking them through the danger of not being able to assist. So we're trying to coordinate a lot of different moving parts at the same time. So depending on the type of call, so if you decide that you're reporting a tip, and you want to know, a lot of people, it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of courage to make that move to call the hotline. I respect everyone that really takes the time to call the hotline because it's a really big move. You're essentially talking to a stranger in another city. You don't know who they are. You don't know what information what they're going to do with the information. You don't know whether they're going to be helping. And so we always give you an opportunity to follow up. We'll give you a case reference number. So if you're reporting a tip, if you want to call back a couple of days later and want to know what happened with that information, we can confirm whether we reported that tip or whether something happened with it. Once we report a tip to law enforcement, our role essentially ends because law enforcement doesn't keep us apprised about what action, if anything, they take. Some law enforcement are great. Some of them give us great outcomes. Some of us will say, hey, remember that tip that you sent me? We actually conducted an undercover investigation. We were able to recover 5 minors. We were able to recover 4 adults. But not every single law enforcement provides us that level of detail. So we can give you information to a certain degree, yes.
I was just curious if a girl is in a hotel, let's say, and they call 911 first. Is the response going to be different than if they call you guys first and then you guys call 911?
Yes. So it's not always going to be different, but the likelihood that it is that it will be different. In a lot of cities, 911 infrastructure is not trained on trafficking. So just to give you an example, and not using the example of an individual stuck in a hotel room. In DC, for example, we have a lot of, because of our metro system, we have a lot of little kids standing at metro stations with an adult selling trinkets out of a box during business hours. These are kids who are 6 to 7 years old, probably even younger, and they've got this laminated sheet saying that they're trying to raise awareness for a particular youth leadership camp or something. They should be in school. We don't know for sure if it's trafficking, but it's certainly exploitative. I mean, why are these kids out on the street selling stuff out of a little box when they should be in school? So if you call during business hours, we have a police officer within the Metro Police Department that we can call at any time during business hours, and he will respond regardless of where he is. He will drive to that location and conduct an interview and extract the minors. However, if it's after hours, we don't have a 24-hour contact, and so we have to call the 911 infrastructure. And the response is usually, this happens all the time in DC, I don't know what you're reporting, you know? And so it's become this norm that it happens all the time. Why are you reporting kids selling trinkets? Like, what's going on? Are they being beaten? Are they, you know, what's the concern? So a lot of it is advocacy and really trying to tell them who we are, what we do, what trafficking is. Sometimes you're not going to get through to them. Sometimes you're going to have to, you know, then you ask to speak to a supervisor, or you call a different police department. But a lot of our role is doing that advocacy. With this, then we will ask to speak to the person with the most direct knowledge. Some of my hardest calls are calls from parents of adult victims. You know, on the cusp, the 17, almost are about to turn 18, or the I just turned 18, and I've met this guy, and I'm now, meeting him, I'm traveling to go meet him, he's promised me a better life. They're an adult. And so it's really hard because you've got this very concerned, very emotional parent in their right mind. I mean, they've got this kid that they're really concerned about. But there's nothing that we can do because that individual is an adult. And without speaking to that individual and assessing what their needs are, it's really, really hard for us to do anything. However, if an individual tells us, if there's heavy indicators of violence, if there's a lot of physical abuse, if there's a lot of emotional abuse, if there's a lot of drug dependency, if there's an extra element, we tend to report. But with adults, it's really hard because you essentially don't want to take away their agency. You still want to give them that choice to make the decisions for themselves. Another area that's become really challenging for us is parents who call about their kids that have developmental disabilities. So the normal pattern is, my daughter is 25, but she behaves like a 5-year-old. She thinks like a 5-year-old. And it's really hard for us to verify because it's a phone call, and that's probably the only time that we're going to speak to that individual. So how do we know, is there a court document, is there a legal document that's declaring your child as a dependent or as, a person in need of services or someone who has a guardian? And so those are really challenging as well, and it's usually the weight of the evidence. Like, is there, do we look at our task force, are they victim-centered? Is this something that they'll look holistically at versus this is just an adult that needs assistance? So not every tip is reported. Only tips with high level of indicators of trafficking are reported. Because again, we're looking for identifying information, tangible information that law enforcement can actually work with, information that they can use to initiate an investigation. So sometimes a great example are fake massage businesses, or more commonly known as commercial front brothels or Asian massage parlors. Every single tip, regardless of where in the country that tip comes from, it follows the same pattern. We have the name of the establishment, an address for the establishment, that it's open late, that it has a heavy male clientele, that all of the employees are Asian, that there are bars or curtains on the window, and that there are advertisements for commercial sex online. So if you got that information, are there any indicators of trafficking? Is there any evidence of force, fraud, or coercion? No, right? Someone's just describing a building. So those are really, really hard to report or decide what to, whether to report. We know as an organization, just through our work, that massage parlors or commercial front brothels are known venues for trafficking. We know that the likelihood is that the women are being trafficked because it's a known network for trafficking. However, not every single law enforcement agency is interested in massage parlors because they're a really, really hard network to permeate. A lot of law enforcement conduct prostitution raids at massage parlors, but the victims either don't speak the language, they've been brainwashed into believing that law enforcement is not there to help them. A lot of the times the victims get arrested for prostitution. And there's a lot of shame involved. There's a huge cultural barrier, there's a huge language barrier, and so it's really, really hard to get cooperating witnesses to enable a full-fledged investigation against massage parlors. So that varies. If I got a massage parlor tip in Houston, for example, I have fantastic law enforcement there, so I will report every single massage parlor to them. However, if I got a massage parlor tip in Kansas, there's no way in hell I'm going to report that because we just don't have a response to deal with massage parlor tips. So we're looking at the information provided. We're looking at the information as a whole. We're looking at how much detail is provided, how much identifying information is provided. And we're looking for information that's more perpetrator heavy as opposed to victim heavy. So especially in the case of adult victims, we're less likely to report any identifying information about the adult victim but we will report as much information about the perpetrator or the trafficker or the potential controller as we can, because ultimately our goal is to get the traffickers arrested and the individuals provided access to services. We are not a mandated reporter, but we do follow mandated reporting guidelines. So that means that if we got a tip about a minor, we will report it. However, if we're talking to a minor, so say for example, if it's a minor that's texted us and we're building rapport with this minor, we're trying to get a sense of what this minor's immediate needs are. This minor is currently safe. Minor is currently contemplating whether they want to leave their trafficking situation, when they want to leave. We're less likely to report that because we're trying to build rapport with that minor and sort of try and develop a plan that works for both. But if we do get a third-party report about a minor, we will report that. Our tips, our urgent tips and our minor tips are reported between 0 to 2 hours of receiving that information, and then any non-urgent or other tips are reported within 24 hours. So we have a very quick turnaround on tips. So as I mentioned earlier, we've divided the country up into 5 regions. I have the privilege of working in the green regions, as you can see. I've got 12 states. I recently inherited Montana, the Dakotas, and Minnesota. So my role is, as a regional specialist, is to really build relationships with the local stakeholders in the state. I'm available to provide any training and technical assistance to anyone that wants it, but ideally, I'm trying to identify who all the relevant actors are and design protocols so that if we receive an emergency case, say for example, in Corpus Christi, Texas, I have a response. I have a 24-hour contact that I can call that can either send someone or go by himself to either conduct a recovery of the individual, conduct an investigation, or I have a 24-hour service provider contact that can go and pick up the individual and transport them to the nearest shelter. In an ideal world, there would be a protocol for every single major city or locality or region, but that's not the case. In my 12 states, the protocols vary extensively. Texas, for example, has a very, very, very robust infrastructure for addressing trafficking. So I have a lot of region-specific, county-specific protocols. The entire map of Texas is covered. I have a response, and no matter where in Texas you call, I have a response for you. In Kansas, for example, I don't have a response in Kansas. I don't have any local agents anywhere in Kansas working on the issue of trafficking. My reporting contacts are in Kansas City, Missouri, and they receive tips about the entire state of Kansas. So I don't have a local response. So I'm really working on identifying local trained law enforcement that I can add to my protocol, that I can call on a 24-hour basis to provide that emergency assistance.
Even the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Even the U.S. Attorney's Office. They work, so because of the close border in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Kansas City, Missouri has sort of jurisdiction over the eastern part of Kansas through some task force that they've created. So that part of the country is covered, of the state is covered, but the rest of the state is.
How about like domestic violence service providers in Kansas State?
So it's easy to find a service response. The great thing about finding victim services is if you don't have an anti-trafficking specific response, you can look to a related field provider to provide that service. However, they're also limited in their reach. A lot of DV organizations only work with adult women. Some of them, if they have a good protocol in place, or if they have enough resources, will be able to use hotel points, or will be able to use, will be able to pay for a hotel room for a male client. But you're not likely to find shelters for males. And a lot of the times we have to refer to homeless shelters for males, and those are not the most ideal places. But you would think that finding a related field provider would be easy, but the advocacy is really, really hard, and it's the messaging that really matters. So if you call a DV organization, a domestic violence organization, and said that you have a victim of sex trafficking that just escaped her pimp, the only word they hear is pimp. They don't hear sex trafficking victim, they think pimp. That is dangerous. That is prostitution. I am not bringing a prostitution into my shelter. That's dangerous for my existing population that I serve. There's a lot of stigma attached even in the related field service area. So even though it's great to have these related fields, and in Montana, we rely on the domestic violence infrastructure to provide shelter to victims of trafficking. So they are fantastic for the most part, but it's not an easy transition because you still have to do a lot of advocacy and a lot of education. So our referral and reporting protocols, we're essentially with the idea that no matter where you call from in the country, there is a response. We are trying, because the federal government and federal law enforcement has been heavily involved in the anti-trafficking movement, a lot of our protocols have a lot of federal agents, which is fantastic. They're very, very victim-centered. They're really on board with the issue. The slight problem with having federal agents on protocols is that they're not first responders. They're not like local law enforcement that are designed to provide that 24-hour response. So even though I have a very victim-centered federal agent, he's located in one part of the state. He is my contact for the entire state, but I eventually have to lean on the 911 to provide that immediate infrastructure. So right now, to that immediate response, so right now, we're focusing with that lens that we've now reached a point where we have a protocol for every state. We now want to look into, can we enhance these protocols by adding local law enforcement, because that eventually, we want people to start using local laws. We want people to start using state laws. We want to see implementation of state laws. We've had a lot of great successful prosecutions under the federal law, but not as many in state laws. So we really want to integrate local responses into our protocol. So this year and moving forward, that's going to be our focus.
Have the cases that have occurred here in Missoula, have those been state or federal level?
I think they've been federal, but I'm not entirely sure. I think they've been federal.
One was state.
One was state.
Actually, two are state.
Oh, great. So again, our national referral database includes anyone that's working on trafficking. We will also include related field providers. And one thing that we're learning just through the hotline, because of the unique requests that we're getting through the hotline, we're expanding our referral database on a daily basis. So one of the requests that we started to see a lot of is with sex trafficking victims, especially with individuals that are in a domestic pimp control situation. One of the control tactics that the pimps use is branding. So tattooing individuals with their name or their signage or whatever it is to symbolize that they're part of their stable.
I understand barcoding.
Barcoding, and in prominent places, they're not hidden by clothing. It's something that you can see just by looking at the person. And so one of the biggest needs that we see, especially once individuals are out of the situation and in their healing process, is removal of these tattoos. And they're expensive, so a lot of these social services organizations can't afford them. And so we started to expand our reach to do a lot of pro bono, to do a lot of outreach to see if there are any tattoo providers that can provide pro bono services to service providers. So we've started to supplement our referral database with referrals such as that. Another request has been attorneys to help them either relocate and change their names, change their identities, help them remove or vacate or expunge any prior convictions. So the requests are becoming a little bit more specific, and so we're trying to meet that increasing need for services. So our referral database is always expanding and adapting to the needs of the time of the callers. So this is protocol map looks like. So we have over 210 individual reporting and referral protocols. Each of these colors represent a specific protocol that is triggered if we get either a request for a crisis response, either on a victim services side or the law enforcement side. So Montana looks like it's got a lot of protocols.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of service protocols. So my law enforcement is the same for the entire state. But all the individual colored protocols signify the different service responses. As I mentioned, we don't have an anti-trafficking specific organization. I only recently learned about one this conference, but we've had to rely on the DV network. And so all of these are based depending on where the shelter is located.
There's a question.
Oh, yeah.
So will you come then into communities and do work, training or with local networks and law enforcement and agencies?
So we do, it depends on our capacity. We definitely try as much as we can to prioritize law enforcement training because there's a real big need for law enforcement training. And there's also been a lot of momentum right now with related field providers. So domestic violence organizations, sexual assault organizations, or medical providers looking to integrate human trafficking responses into their existing protocols. So we've sort of identified certain populations or certain professions that are priority areas for us. If it's something a little bit more community-based, like a small town or a church congregation, we're less likely to be able to travel to provide that training request. We are able to, because we're based out of Washington, D.C., we are able to just logistically either do a webinar, online training, or just create an online forum to conduct the training. So it's not always in person, but we try to meet as many of the requests.
Do you have any toolkits?
We have tons of toolkits. And I'm happy to give you my business card after, feel free. Our website has tons of information. I will admit right now it's a very hard website to navigate. We're hopefully going to make it a little bit more user-friendly, but there's a lot of resources on our website. We have a lot of free online trainings. You can also, we have a monthly newsletter that comes out that's very topic-specific.
And that's another follow-up question. So do you have maybe a training system for folks who want to do the work in their state?
Mm-hmm. So we're trying to build a hotline toolkit so that community members of the general public have this toolkit to help promote awareness and increase education of trafficking in their communities. We have one specifically for students that we've created, so students both at the high school level as well as the college level, so there's this toolkit to help them promote awareness of both the hotline and trafficking, either in their school groups or in their school community or amongst their friends. There's tons of different ways, so we have tons of toolkits.
We also do train the trainer program.
That's what I'm saying.
So yeah, and that is really effective for us because then we do the training once, and then the people that receive the training directly from us are then empowered to provide that training
Absolutely.
to others. So we definitely do train the trainer programs.
And what would be the contact to look at receiving that? Okay.
We do have a process. We try to streamline because we have a specific training team. And on our website, we have a link to a training request form. So we usually ask that everyone submit a training request through our website, and that gets streamlined according to the region, to the relevant program specialist. So we do a lot of tip reporting, and we report to a variety of different agencies. Some are task forces, some are individual police officers, a lot of local, state, and federal. An ideal reporting protocol includes individuals from a multitude of different agencies. Just to give you an idea, this is the Dallas protocol. So an ideal protocol will have a response for every single demographic and every single population, so that we have identified someone who takes all minor tips. In Colorado, for example, I have an individual that takes all domestic minor sex trafficking tips, and I have an individual that takes all 4 national minor tips. I have someone that takes all tips involving both sex and labor involving U.S. citizen adults. So the more specific you can get and the more targeted you can get to a particular population, to a particular type of trafficking, the more robust protocol that you have. So ideally, we would love to have 24-hour contacts. In Houston, for example, for the longest time, I had one person receiving all our tips. So regardless of what type of trafficking it was, regardless of what kind of demographic was represented in the tip, we had one person that then filtered it out according to whatever the tip referenced. So the protocols could vary depending on the region, depending on the task force. A lot of these places have formal funded task forces. A lot of them either are just sort of this informal coalition or this informal task force. It depends on what the structure is locally. Referral requests. Most of our referral requests are shelter and requests for case management or legal assistance. With a lot of our labor cases, as exploitative as they are, the request is usually that they want to get paid the money that they're owed. So a lot of the times, we get a lot of calls from migrant workers who are here on temporary work visas, and they will tell you about horrendous abuse that they've experienced at the hand of their employer. But their immediate need at the time of their call is to get their back wages owed to you. So I have spoken to so many migrant workers who have referenced being sexually assaulted by their employer, but that's not something that they want to address. They want to address this tangible need of, I'm here, I worked all these hours, I need to get my money back. And so it's really hard, we operate an empowerment model, so we can definitely try and address the sexual assault and try to get them connected to an agency to help them deal with the trauma of the assault, but most of the time they just want to speak to a legal service provider or to the Department of Labor to get their money. A really big need that's shown up quite recently is transportation. Is anyone familiar with traveling sales crews? Mm-hmm. So the door-to-door magazine sales crews that either sell magazines or high-end cleaning products. I don't know who would pay $75 for a jar of cleaning fluid. But they have become extremely exploitative in the past couple of years. So they usually hire youth or young adults, and they advertise very lucrative offers, great opportunity, you get to travel the country, we pay for all your transportation, everything. They're very exploitative. They usually are subjected to quotas. There's a lot of sexual assault that goes on. And the dynamics is that if you're not meeting the quota, if you're challenging your employer, if you complain about your employment situation, your crew leader is going to leave you abandoned, usually in a city that doesn't have much access to local resources. And so we get a call saying, I'm so far away from home, I just need to get home. So there's been a really, really big need for transportation, trying to get them access to a shelter for that evening and then trying to get them home. So we reach out to a lot of churches, a lot of organizations that are able to help buy a bus ticket or pay half of a bus ticket to be able to get that individual some assistance.
We've had the clinic solution people come through the Vanderhoof.
Yeah.
And the people they bring, it's really odd because we live in a very redneck conservative area, and they bring in these black people knocking on our doors.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to get them killed in our valley. Especially
They're very,
farther
very
south you go.
exploitative. And now people are knowing to ask, have you eaten today? Or are you being treated well? Or have you had a rest? Or have you had water to drink? And the answers will surprise you because most of the time it's going to be no. So if they do come in your neighborhoods, just take note of the company. They usually are accompanied with a laminated document. Sort of read that, take note of it, call the hotline because we do report these and we do try. I think there's a big case out of Missouri right now against one of the crews because they were recruiting minors and then from day one they were tattooing them and branding them. So there's a lot of exploitation going on. So this, similar to the reporting protocol, this is what our referral protocol will look like as well. So we've identified specific organizations that work with specific populations. And so we ask a lot, and this is usually a little difficult and seems sort of very invasive, especially when you're talking to a victim or a survivor, because in order to connect them to the best resource, we have to ask questions about their age, about their citizenship, because there are organizations that don't work with foreign nationals. There are organizations that only work with domestic minors. And so it's striking that balance between trying to get all the relevant information to be able to connect them to the best resource in their locality. So, some of the call types. What time do we have? Till 10:15, right? Okay. We take a lot of general information calls. These are students, community members wanting to learn more about trafficking, how to get involved in their communities. Crisis calls, like I said, are few and far between. We do get the call volume has increased from victims and survivors, but it is still a small percentage in comparison to some of the other calls that we receive. Tips, we get a lot of tips about trafficking. High-risk calls involve labor exploitation calls, related calls. So we get a lot of calls about child abuse. We get a lot of calls about child pornography. So we do take that information, we report it to the relevant entity. So when we do get information about child abuse, we're not saying, sorry, you've got the wrong number. We'll still take that information and pass it along to the relevant agency. We report a lot of tips to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, especially if we're getting information about back page ads that look like the individuals depicted might be minors. The great thing about NCMEC is they do a lot of value added. And so if you give them just a link or a back page ad, they do a lot of that background searching in public databases and are able to compile a packet for law enforcement. And we've learned through working with one another that we essentially report to the same people. So we use NCMEC a lot to report child pornography cases. And then the miscellaneous cases are a combination of people who are just looking to learn what their basic wage and hour rights are or what their immigration rights are. So it's not really related to trafficking. But then on the other flip side, you also get a lot of prank callers. You also get a lot of traffic violation calls. Polaris apparently is a big ski vehicle, or it's a company that produces a lot of snow equipment. It's amazing. I think someone called us and said, I'm in an avalanche, help me. And I'm like, why are you calling me? So top line stats. I can only get you current stats up until February because we're still cleaning our March and April data, but hopefully this should give you an idea. We've operated the hotline since December 7, 2007. So we've taken over 103,000 hotline calls. We've identified over 30,000 victims. So high indicators. So like I said, we don't do any formal assessments for trafficking because our interaction with our callers is very limited. Sometimes it spans a couple of days, a couple of months, a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's just one single phone call. A lot of the times if you're talking to a victim, they hang up, they never call back. So what we're doing is we're assessing for trafficking, but sometimes a lot of law enforcement will call us and say, can you tell us if this individual is a trafficking victim? And we do a thorough assessment, but it's not enough to verify that someone is a victim of trafficking.
So not to throw you off, but and I know sometimes there's a disconnect between what it says that the workshop's about and what you're doing. So I love that you're presenting all this, but I'm curious, in the time we have left, are you going to present any information about the picture in Montana and what you guys have?
Yes.
Great.
I was going to give you just a sort of a national perspective before I went into Montana.
Thank you.
Thank you. So these are some of the top line stats. This is an idea of what trafficking cases look like across the country. So this is a depiction of 2013 trafficking cases throughout the country. This doesn't mean that the Dakotas and Montana and Wyoming, there's no trafficking happening in those states. This should be a direct reflection of both people's awareness and knowledge of the issue of trafficking and of their awareness of the hotline. So these statistics, these pictures, these heat maps are based solely off of the data that we've collected based on calls that we received over the hotline. So please remember that context as you're looking at all of these statistics. So just to give you a breakdown, we've received over, so out of that 103,000, we've received over 15,000 cases that reference potential cases of trafficking. Lots of cases about adults and minors. As you can see, it's pretty even between foreign nationals and United States citizens. Involving females, this sort of adds, I guess, to the idea that a lot of the majority of the victims are women and children. But I think a lot of it can be attributed to the fact that it's still a crime where people are not self-identifying as victims, and people are just now understanding the issue and the dynamics surrounding trafficking. And so males, it's very hard to get someone to self-identify as a victim of trafficking, or even a victim. Some of the most common networks that we've seen referenced overall are commercial front brothels on the sex trafficking side. Internet-based, this is primarily individuals who are reporting people being advertised on the internet for commercial sex. Hotel motel based, we have a lot of hotels involved right now with regards to education and awareness. And then escort delivery, this could be in-call or out-call services. On the labor trafficking side, a lot of domestic work. Living in the DC area with diplomats and World Bank and IMF, tons of domestic work cases. Restaurants, small businesses, nail salons, traveling sales crews have really picked up over the past few years, and then peddling rings. These are begging rings, peddling rings. In California, we get a lot of tips about individuals that are part of the Roma community that are usually out begging with children, very young children, at shopping centers and mall parking lots. These are some of the call trends that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of exploitation in carnivals. I probably will never go to a carnival ever again because they're so exploitative. We get a lot of calls from buyers of commercial sex, a lot of calls from Johns. They are as disgusting as they are very valuable callers because they always find themselves attached to one particular person that they've fallen in love with, and they want to go into this white knight savior mentality, and they want to rescue that person out of that situation. And so they're providing very detailed information because they have that direct contact to that individual. Facebook and human trafficking, sex trafficking at hotels, we run the gamut of the types of calls that we get. The great thing about the hotline is you never really know who you're going to speak to and what kind of different situation you're going to learn. Last year, we got a lot of calls about trafficking occurring in puppy mills. We also got a lot of calls about trafficking occurring in summer camps, which traumatized a lot of our staff who grew up going to summer camps. What a lot of people want to know how victims and survivors find us. A lot of it is based on outreach of our number, getting our number out there to people. That's why we heavily, at least to the policy side, are always trying to do mandatory posting of our hotline number, and we rely a lot on community members to really spread the word about our number. Know Your Rights is a pamphlet produced by the Department of State, and anyone that comes into the country on a temporary work visa has access to this pamphlet. And it has two numbers. It has the number to the Department of Justice human trafficking line, which is not a 24-hour line, it's just 9 to 5. And it's a direct line to federal law enforcement. Not many people want to talk to law enforcement. The other number is us. So, Montana. So this is a heat map, quite different from the national map, but these are calls that we received from Montana. The trafficking dots are very little. I think there's one dot in the Billings area and one dot in the Kalispell area. Again, this doesn't mean, this is just a reflection that there's not much awareness about trafficking, and there's definitely no awareness about the human trafficking hotline, because again, these are our stats. So I was trying to do a regional breakdown just to give you an idea of the types of calls that we're getting from this particular region. Montana, to date, so up until February, we've had about 154 calls from Montana. Thanks. So that's not a lot of calls. Since 2007 till 2014, we've only had 154 calls. We want to really get this number up. We really want to, and especially now with the mandatory posting law that you guys have got since that passed last year, hopefully we'll see these numbers rising. And hopefully they'll result in a lot more trafficking cases. So out of the 150 or 40 calls that you received, 27 of those reference cases of human trafficking. So it's not, that doesn't mean that trafficking is low or is small scale in comparison to other states. It's still significant. 29 cases of human trafficking is a big number. 29 cases of people enslaved here in Montana. Should be enough to get the momentum going.
So of those numbers,
Mhm.
from 2007 to now, what time frame did most of those come in? I mean, were they just recently because there was somewhat educational tool in Montana, or, because I've never heard of Polaris really?
I pulled up the 2013 state report. See if I can get you. So in 2013, we got 44 calls from Montana.
Most in one area?
Yeah, mostly sort of on the west. And then out of those, we had 10 of those reference cases of potential trafficking. So 10 of the 29, so I think definitely a lot more awareness, both of the issue and of the hotline. A lot of those were largely sex trafficking, and so a lot of the sex trafficking were commercial front brothels, domestic pimp control, internet-based trafficking. On the labor trafficking side, I'm not convinced that labor trafficking does not occur here. I've learned a lot that there's a huge agricultural industry here. And if they're migrant workers, they definitely have access to the Department of State's Know Your Rights access. They probably just don't have access to a phone or a means to be able to reach out for help, and especially if it's in remote areas. So we really need to identify legal service providers or entities and groups that are doing outreach to these workers. It doesn't necessarily have to be outreach about trafficking. It just has to be outreach based on, here, these are your basic employment rights as a legal employee here in the United States, and then weave in trafficking.
Oh, you know, trying to kind of find out how a lot of these things would apply to the average person, somebody like myself. So, like, you know, I've been checking the Craigslist, we're looking for a used boat. And I'm sure there's different items where you could find some of these things that you're talking about, but I would never click on those because I have no interest. Therefore, I'm not going to spend time saying, I found 2 different things and then report them. Plus, maybe realistically, there would be somebody from the sheriff's office or the Brazil Police Department, perhaps whose job is to do some of that anyways.
You would think so.
And, you know, so, I mean, the typical person, frankly, if I thought I had a colleague or somebody, you professor here, that they spend 2 hours looking at different sites, I would think they're perverts, to be honest with you. Why would they do this as opposed to just doing their business? So what are the things we would be looking for? Or when you're describing like the Asian women in houses with iron bars and what have you. I mean, we had something in Missoula like that. It was stick out like a sore thumb. So what are the things that somebody like me would be looking for? Because I was actually mentioning that to Detective McDermott yesterday. My wife and I were doing some laps at Clausen Field while our son was playing baseball, and there's this little girl about 4 or 5 years old who was walking in front of us. There's nobody around her, what have you. So my wife said, honey, do you know where your parents are? And she said, well, I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. And my wife said, well, that's good for you, but you need to find out where your mom is. And then we continued talking. It wasn't like somebody else wasn't approaching her. But I told my wife, I said, you know what? If it wasn't with you, I would not do that, because if I approach her, somebody might think I'm the pervert. And before I know it, they put me in the back of a police car to say, here's this old, excuse my language, this old fart, trying to, prey on this little girl. So, there's some of that as well, probably, for the average person.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of fear involved, because there's always that mentality that if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. But that's not always going to be the case, and I think it's better to be vigilant and more proactive rather than be silent about it. So I think we're not telling people to actively go out and look for these things. We're just asking you to be a little bit more hyper-vigilant about your surroundings. If something does look out of the ordinary, even if you don't have a lot of information, it's better to tell someone about it. You don't have to call us if you don't feel comfortable. Even put it down on paper. Or even if it's something that you see and say, oh, maybe I'll pass through this all the time when I go to work. is there something different? Can I point out specific things about this particular building and report it? I think with a lot of people, especially with the commercial front brothels, there's a lot of this mindset that I need to go in and I need to, firsthand look at what's going on, and I need to see if there's victims of trafficking. I need to see if they're Asians. I need to hear sounds that commercial sex is occurring. We definitely discourage people from doing that. We have had people, I've had Johns that I've spoken to that are so adamant that they're gonna go in there with a gun and rescue this woman that they've fallen in love with, and it's not safe. It's not, I don't care if you're not, concerned about your safety, but you're putting the other individuals at risk as well. So it's striking that balance between being highly observant, being proactive, and then sort of not crossing that threshold where it's becoming uncomfortable for you, because we don't really want you to go out of your comfort zone to find this extra information. And trafficking, unless you're looking for it, that saying is it's hidden in plain sight. Unless you know what you're looking for, you're not going to know what, what I'm saying? So,
Just add
if
to
you
that,
wanna.
that if you go on our website, we have indicators.
Right.
So we have things, red flags. We separate it out for children as well as, we have specific ones for kids, but then we have indicators for just trafficking generally. And there are things that you can go and sort of look for, and so maybe have in the back of your mind. And so if you're out somewhere and you see one or two of these things, maybe that can be then, if you feel compelled to report either to us, or if you feel more comfortable, going to law enforcement. But there are those indicators out there. There are also cards that a lot of different agencies put out that sort of have indicators that people keep in their wallets or in their pockets. And so these are all, things that you can just sort of have in the back of your mind. And if you see something, you'd be surprised how quickly it'll trigger in your head and be like, I saw that's weird, I'm gonna call. So that's definitely something sort of the average person can do is read through them, and if you see something, not to sound like the Department of Homeland Security, but if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
I just want to say something and kind of jump in if you want, but one of the cases that we had here in Missoula was at a hotel, and they're the nicer hotels too. They're not like going to be the Sleepy Six or whatever that one is. I don't know what it's called, but it was first called in because the pimp was smoking marijuana in the car, and that got the ball rolling, and then police came in and they started targeting hotel staff, and it turned out the pimp was paying in cash, and there was so it's not just so much like you see a little kid, you see something illegal going on, and it can open up the door to so much more.
Yeah. And I would just add, like in terms of labor trafficking, if you think like, if you go to the fair this summer and you go there with your kids and you look at just kind of what are the working conditions of the people there, was this guy here at 8 o'clock in the morning and it's 8 p.m. and he's still here? Think of cherry picking down at the plant, and we have a lot of foreign nationals who do that work. We have lots of logging, and it's very, very rural, isolated areas, so I think in terms of labor trafficking. And then just, you saw a little girl, what if you're at a truck stop and you see what looks to be a 14-year-old who is on her own, and so just kind of really, if this was my daughter, would I be okay with that? And again, like maybe it's nothing, but maybe you can make a call, So I think just those little things.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. That's great.
I'm just going to say for this gentleman, law enforcement needs the community support because it's not a law enforcement problem, it's a community problem. So if something doesn't look right, just like drug activity in your neighborhood, you see excessive traffic, things that catch your attention that don't look right, it's better to call 911 and have an officer investigate it and it be nothing that may be missing. Because if you're out there in the community, if you're around hotels, if you're around apartments where excessive people are living, you got too many people in an apartment or two-bedroom apartment, you got 6 or 7 females in there with an older male, or it doesn't even have to be that many if you just have females rotating through an apartment or a motel room, things like that, those indicators they talk about. But you should call it. You think something's up and you can get a better response if it's something that you think is immediate need for law enforcement, call 911.
Absolutely.
I'm just starting to hand out the evaluation, so if you could just fill
And these cards do have some indicators at the back of them, and I'm happy to give you more. And for law enforcement specifically, in fact, we tried to do these for all audiences. We've created templates that are for pocket-sized cards you can put in your wallet that have the definition of trafficking on one side and have quick assessment questions on the other. So we started to make them for medical providers, law enforcement, educators. If any of you are interested, please take my business card. I'm happy to send you the templates.
So if we went to your site and I wanted to go to my pastor, my church, and make this pretty well known, we've got what's called the Missoula Interfaith Collaborative, and we're trying to work on things like this. Could my pastor go to this site and have an ad that's already pre-made that we could put in our weekly program?
Yes.
Not to make us, in Montana, we don't necessarily like to police our neighbors, but we know when something looks a little odd here. It's a pretty good quality of life here, and so, but something that could be, hey, prostitution is not legal in Montana. Human trafficking is not legal. This is what it may look like. Here's the number to call.
Yes. There's different things. So we have a, I don't know what you call them technologically, but you can copy sort of our flyer or a sticker. We have this template available on our website that you can just copy and paste on your materials. And then we've developed a toolkit specifically for faith-based professionals. So there's a lot of targeted to speak to your congregation or to your community.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody have any last minute questions? I mean, this is just sort of repetitive in terms of how, what can we do? Please, please, please save the hotline number to your phones. Save the texting code. I have lots of business cards. I am your regional specialist for Montana. Call me. If you know of any organizations that are working on the issue, please let me know. We would love to supplement our database. We would love to supplement our resources. And we're all here to work together. So if you're working on the issue of trafficking, if you're working for a related field, please come up and talk to me and let me know, and we can definitely work together.
Would you tell us your name again?
My name's Vanessa. Vanessa Chauhan.
I do have a question.
Here we go.
Yesterday it was mentioned, I think it was in another session, about how Missoula Flathead has a task force developed already. So it sounds like Western Montana's got it together. So for Billings and Northeast Montana, I think it was mentioned that there was a task force being created. Who are these creating people in Billings? Do we know?
I don't know. I know Diane is trying. I don't know if you know Diane Yaris with Seroptimus. She is going to sort of really help me navigate what the task forces look like. I'm assuming they're an extension of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then I'm just focusing, I think Billings has their own trained officers within their local police department that are trying to mobilize to create a task force. And there might just be an offshoot of the statewide U.S. Attorney's task force. Which I'm
A lot of them are through different service providers.
Right.
So that's right.
One type of training material that we developed and the training that we've done is coalition building. So if you have advocates or service providers, people that sort of want to form a task force or a coalition, we have, and task forces, we have information and best practices and sort of a lot of information on effective ways to do that. So if that's something you all are looking to build in your community, we have resources to help with that as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all the questions. I'll be here if you have any questions.